What's up, everybody? Welcome into the latest The Blitz Network Radio. With you here, as always, as editor-in-chief and your host, Robert Siglinski. And we have a busy episode for you tonight. We are going to dive straight into NFL free agency and the whirlwind that was. I mean, it's still going on. We're well into the second wave, but it's been a crazy few days, and there's really, in my mind, no one better to help recap this and to help analyze this than the youngest future general manager I know, Brad Spielberger, who is the cap wizard at TBN, who has been a big riser, obviously, this week. I'm sure most of you are familiar with him by now, that if you subscribe and read to TBN, but he's expanding his horizons, and I appreciate having him as a future anonymous source. Whatever happens there. Brad, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, thank you. I appreciate the confidence in my future. I hope I can live up to your expectations.
Well, yeah, like I was telling Brad in the pre-pod, 20 years from now would be a good expectation to be the head of a football franchise. But for now, he's laid a good enough foundation to at least have that confidence. You can follow me on Twitter at Robert Siglinski. You can follow Brad on Twitter at BradOTC. And you can follow us on Twitter at the Blitznet. And let's jump right in, my friend. Bears making a few deals. Not really. They made a sizable contract restructure for Khalil Mack, clearing $11 million in cap space, and that opened up Pandora's box, so to speak, of everybody thinking Le'Veon Bell or Justin Houston, who I think still remains unsigned at the time of this recording. Earl Thomas, whatever. That opened up because the Bears gave themselves so much space. They didn't do any of that, and they still haven't done any of that. They signed a bunch of moderate veterans, a bunch of depth fill-ins, potential starter this Thursday afternoon. Brad, before we get into each signing, your general thoughts on how the Bears have approached this free agency period and what that restructure, that Mac restructure means.
I think it was fair to think when you saw that go down, that he was creating space for maybe a splash signing. And I know he said at some press conference, I'm not going to create room unless I'm going to use it. So I myself, I believe, basically tweeted out when that Mac restructure came through that a move was coming. I think that I'm not upset at all that a big splash hasn't happened or might not happen. I think it shows honestly his confidence in the guys he has already in the locker room. He wanted to create space to fill some holes, get some depth at certain positions, but he was not creating room to make a big splash. I think he, rightfully, in my opinion, thinks he already has those big studs. I think depth is an underrated piece of football, and I think pace. I mean, if you look at his injury history, with the Bears, he's had some tough ones. So, I think he understands that depth is important, and I think it's obviously quieter than years past, but I think there have been some nice, hole filling.
Does it concern you, though, to push back money? And I'm asking this out of ignorance because I'm obviously not privy to how this all completely works. Does it concern you to backload a contract like Max and kind of keep pushing everything forwards if you're not making splash signings, if you're not kind of pushing your hands in? I mean, they have 20 of 22 starters locked in, 21 with Clinton-Dix in the fold, which we'll get to in a bit. I mean, isn't that a recipe for disaster, just based off of how things can develop?
So that is fair. And I think that, I guess kind of what you're saying is if you're going to create the room, it would be for an all-in move where you'd kind of be like, well, I'm willing to take on that future risk, because we're putting all our chips in the center of the table. I think, first, it's Khalil Mack. So when you restructure a deal, like they have, in that particular instance where you're converting, salary into a signing bonus, which of course then, prorates, or is split equally among the remaining years, you're kicking the can down the road, so to speak. But it's not good to do that with a lot of contracts, with a lot of guys, with guys that, might not be here in a couple of years. I don't foresee Khalil Mack, leaving the Bears anytime soon. So, from that perspective, yes, it's what I think it was $11 million that they, created in space that they're going to have to push out over the life of his contract. But realistically, I mean, in 3 years, he's going to be a Bear still. So, that number is going to be pretty small, so I think from that angle, it's okay.
Yeah, and I think we have to keep in mind that, there's a lockout coming probably maybe in 2 years. So why worry about cap hell when there won't be any games to play anyway, right?
That is going to be fascinating. Yeah, 2021 negotiations are going to be very interesting. I think it's interesting in this particular free agency to mention that too, because I mean we're seeing Le'Veon and Antonio Brown and Odell Beckham do things that have really never happened before. Create a whole new market, trade market, but also just flat out ignoring a franchise tag, but not losing that accrued season, so he was still allowed to become an unrestricted free agent. They could have tagged him again. They ultimately decided not to, which I think was probably wise. But yeah, so a player has now ignored a franchise tag. So as much as people probably thought, oh, 2021 is going to be all about franchise tags and players want to get rid of franchise tags. Well, we'll see, because players could also just say, if you tag me, I'm going to pull Le'Veon, so go ahead. And so we'll see.
We'll get some more bell and ramifications from things that happen over this free agency a little bit later. But let's dive in specifically now to each of the Bears signings. Now it's 4 signings with the addition of Clinton-Dix. And I say we lead with him. I think at this stage of the game, he's the most impactful, or at least on the field signing that they'll have made. He's going to be their starting strong safety. Largely has the same skill set as Eddie Jackson. Brad, what do you like about the deal? What do you like about the financial perspectives of it and bringing on a talented former first-round pick like this?
Sure. So, I think when initially it broke that it was a 1-year deal, the reaction was, oh, it's going to be a prove it deal. I think that the term prove it deal applies to basically a guy is proving that he should get a major contract, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Tyrann Mathieu, I'm going to sign a 1-year $7 to prove I deserve, the highest safety contract, APY of all time. Which he got when he tied Landon Collins technically on, a per year. So, Landon Collins, or excuse me, Clinton-Dix is more like a prove I should be a starter in the NFL. You know what I'm saying? It's not a prove I'm one of the best guys. It's prove I'm one of the guys. So, I mean, $3.5 million, you can't really be concerned about that. I think the connection to Eddie Jackson, they're both from Alabama. I've seen now on Twitter that they're really good friends. I saw the day after the Bears playoff loss, Clinton-Dix posted an Instagram post. It's a picture of Eddie, talking about how hard he worked, how much of a great of a player he is, how proud of him he is for becoming, the great safety he is. So, I mean, from that perspective, just the fact that the chemistry between those two is already incredible, and you're basically giving him a flyer. I mean, it's a 1-year flyer. So I think it's a great deal financially.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna respect. Could you see a scenario playing out where, let's say Clinton-Dix has a solid 2019 season? Is there a scenario where the Bears give him a Prince Amukamara like 2-year deal like Prince received last year? Is that something that you could see through? And how would that factor into things, especially considering they might be in similar they might have similar cap limitations next year?
Obviously, anything's possible, but I would honestly say no. I think that they, reports said they were interested in Weddle. Reports said they were interested in a lot of what seemed like more short-term guys, especially after what we saw with Collins and Thomas and everything. Eddie Jackson's going to ask for like $17 million a year in a couple of years. So,
right.
And you simply can't give that much money to the safety position. So, I honestly think, I've been thrust into becoming a compensatory pick expert this week because I like that people apparently are fascinated with the topic. And I think one thing that you have to remember is, I've been talking a lot about, this year, but okay, we signed him to a 1-year deal. If he has a great season that deserves a contract like you just mentioned, if he signs that somewhere else, then he immediately is a great, 1-year flyer, and he could land you, a 4th or 5th or 6th round pick, if he does earn that $7-8 million contract, elsewhere. But no, I don't see the Bears giving him that. But wouldn't that be a great problem to have?
So you see it as more of a 1-year fill-in to potentially turn into a draft resource next offseason, just to clarify, correct?
100%. I mean, yeah. I mean, if he has an incredible year and the chemistry between him and Jackson is just out of this world, I mean, they're not gonna not consider it. But I don't see. I don't think they can sink, $7-8 million a year into the other safety position. No, I think they're going to have. That's going to be, a cheaper position on the defense going forward.
We'll kind of do this for every signing, Brad, as you and I talked in the pre-show. Brad's going to give you the financial parameters, how things will look long-term and then short-term, and how this all fits into the Bears' salary constrictions. And then I will give you the football terms and things to consider scheme-wise. So with Clinton-Dix, from the football perspective, there's going to be a lot of conversation that he's an unwilling tackler, that he's a bad tackler, that he freelances too much. And those are all true. I know I saw a specific stat from Pro Football Focus where he had less missed tackles than Adrian Amos. I would still qualify Adrian Amos as a better tackler. Clinton-Dix is almost the perfect carbon copy of his teammate. He literally plays the exact same way as Eddie Jackson. Eddie Jackson just has better range and just has better instincts. So the thing that you have to watch, that you guys have to watch, that as this develops and as they find a way to seamlessly have both into this vaunted defense, is how much more willing Clinton-Dix is being a tackler. Because let's just give it for perspective. Eddie Jackson is a bad tackler, but he gets 4 to 5 picks. He forces 4 to 5 turnovers, whatever, gets a few touchdowns, has probably the best pass range of any safety in the league, sans Earl Thomas. He makes up for it. And he's not always in the position where the Bears aren't putting him in the box. They're not exposing the worst part of his game. They're asking him to roam out on the range. I fully expect largely the same thing to be done with Clinton-Dix. And if anything, Clinton-Dix will make Jackson a better player because Jackson doesn't have to cover up for everybody's mistakes now. Jackson can be more of the guy. He can afford to take more risks. He can afford to, if he sees something formation-wise, if he sees something he saw in film study, he can do more of the Ed Reed thing where he's just going to decide to do his own thing, his own mercenary-like thing on any given play. So, the Clinton-Dix physical traits and mental trait struggles are legitimate to me, and I do have reservations about them. But I think on a talented defense where they're really going to just ask him to stick to what he's able, where he'll probably be a little more motivated than he has been over the past few years. You can't really fault the fit too much. Especially from guys that are purely available. I personally love the move, and just off of Brad's perspective, 1 year fill in, you can get a compensatory draft choice out of it next year if everything works out. It's one of the more ideal moves that Ryan Pace and the Bears could have made to shore up their defensive backfield. Brad, let's shift over to Buster Skrine. So this will not be as glowing. Let's talk about the financials for his move. I get the sense that this doesn't, just based off of the structure of the contract, that the Bears don't necessarily have that much confidence in him.
Yeah, so Skrine is an interesting one. I mentioned when I first tweeted about it that I'm guessing Matt Nagy had a lot of conversations with Todd Bowles, who he's close with, about Skrine and what he brings from a mental perspective. And again, I've seen, just like with Dix, I've seen a lot of Skrine struggles, and I've read all about it. I think for me, the most important aspect of what he brings is that he can, not very well, but he can play every cornerback position. And so, I think that his ability to fill in anywhere, we had Callahan obviously, miss games this year and he's injury prone. And we had, Mukamara had a hamstring issue and missed a couple games. And I mean, Kevin Tolliver, the undrafted free agent, was kind of that next man up, or Sherrick McManus for Callahan's sake. And for me, the fact that if any guy, any corner goes down, Skrine's at least a capable replacement. He's at least, a good second option at any of the corner positions is kind of intriguing. But from a financial perspective, yeah, it's they didn't give him a ton. He's I think 29 now. He was originally with the Browns. Got a decent sized deal from the Jets. They expected big things from him, and struggled with, I think, penalties was his biggest issue. You can get more into the fit and all of that. If he ends up being the slot guy. But I guess my final thought is, it's not a ton of money, and my approach to the secondary additions is I mean, you bring in Chuck Pagano, who's originally a DB's coach. I'm assuming, he has a ton of say on these guys, and I'm assuming he knows that he can, after meeting them and talking with them, that he can make them work, make them fit. And I think we have to trust that. I think we have to, as fans, believe that, well, I mean, because if not, then, it was a bad hire. But I think we have to believe that Chuck Pagano sees roles for these guys and believes in his ability to work with them, and again, like we mentioned with Amos leaving, Skrine will be surrounded by 10 very good players. So looking at him on the Jets versus looking at how he's going to fill in with the Bears are two very different things.
Brad, did you know that Skrine is 457 tackles and 9 interceptions? Did you know how impressive that is?
I saw that
his career?
in like 183 games or something like that.
Yeah, over the course of 8 years. Wow, so impressive that he's been able to get barely over an interception a season. What a playmaker. See, and I like how you lay out the financials of Skrine's deal, but I'm sorry, until he'll have to prove it wrong to me when he finally gets on the field, because I don't remotely like the football fit. And I'm going to disagree with the sentiment of that you just mentioned, where we trust Pagano and where you let things play out. That's what anybody can say for any move their team makes. I like Pagano's overall defensive scheme. I like what he's going to bring to the table as far as aggressiveness and mixing up his pressures, but I'm not going to trust his evaluation of a player that he's never personally coached, that has had injury issues of late, concussion specifically, and on a bad Jets defense was still one of the weak links, was still someone that opposing offense is still consistently attacked. I think in the respect to now seeing with how Clinton-Dix fits in, maybe Skrine is the kind of guy you work to have a little bit more in the box. You have him as a kind of a hybrid DB, hybrid linebacker, where you're not having him in coverage to where he can have so many of those penalties you just mentioned. But yeah, based on the information we have at hand, based off of what I've seen of him, what I've quickly perused over him film-wise, what we have statistically beforehand, and how his career is unfolded, I'm not going to let things play out. Like I need to see it on the field. I need to see how he actually plays on the field. The information we have going in isn't glowing to me. And as I was getting into arguments yesterday, even with people on Twitter, like I'm not personally criticizing him. I'm just not a fan of the move. There's a difference. Yeah.
No, I think that's all fair, and they did give him a good amount of money. So I guess I would say, like, if you don't like the fit at all from a player perspective, then it wasn't, it wasn't a discount deal by any stretch. And I'm with you. Until we see it on the field, we can't just have blind trust. I guess, I want to, I suppose, but no, I mean,
I get it. We're just talking, man. We're just talking.
Yeah.
Let's talk Mike Davis now, who is kind of curious to me. What do you like? So this is a guy that will probably fit in. Well, not probably. He will fit into the Bears running back rotation. Has never really faced that much of an extensive workload over the course of his career. But there are some optimistic things to like about him. The deal isn't too much of an investment. What do you like about this?
Yeah, so the deal is again not much of anything. 2 years, $6 million. We still, for some reason, don't know the actual details. I think we've gotten all the rest of them so far at Over the Cap, but we still haven't seen the exact details from Mike, but for Mike Davis. But just from what I've seen last year, the Seahawks, running back by committee was, it was fascinating, honestly. They obviously ran the ball more than anyone by a significant margin, and just kind of pounded it down your throat. What I like from Mike Davis, again, I'm not a tape expert, but I liked what I saw. I think that for me, when I look at a running back, we joke around a lot. I don't value the position extremely high. And he's versatile. He's good catching out of the backfield. The one thing I've been trying to look for lately is when a guy catches a ball, what does his lower body look like? And I think that the big focus on Jordan Howard originally was, he keeps dropping the ball. When he started, last year he had 0 drops, and that was great. But that wasn't the sole issue. Not only was he dropping, I mean, he dropped like touchdowns in 2017, but if you watch him, when he catches the ball, his bottom half of his body is motionless, and he has to basically restart his running. It's kind of, he runs a route, the catch point is a stop and go, but the route's not stopping. You know what I'm saying? And so Mike Davis, if you watch him, you basically he'll be turning back towards the quarterback, catching the ball, and his little legs are still churning forward. So that I really liked when I saw that.
Yeah, and I don't know that I necessarily like Davis, but I will sound a little bit hypocritical, and I'll say I'll let this one play out more because the Seattle offensive line hasn't been great, or it wasn't great necessarily last year. I know they picked it up in previous respects, and I don't expect him to necessarily be. He's not going to be a workhorse. He's going to be a guy that can catch the ball, that can touch the ball 10 to 15 times when he's in the game. There won't be so much predictability as opposed to having a guy like Howard. Oh, hey, he's probably going to get a carry up the gut, or okay, he's probably going to get a carry off tackle. We don't really have to worry about him as a pass threat. The one thing I will say too is let's not. I saw some things. Oh, hey, like Thomas Jones wasn't much of anything before the Bears acquired him way back when in the mid 2000s. Okay, let's scale things back a little bit. Mike Davis isn't going to be Thomas Jones. Those are rare kinds of cases. I think Thomas Jones was a former high draft pick, had a little bit of a higher rap. And the Bears saw something special there. If Mike Davis does turn out to be that kind of level of impact of a player, that'd be special. But let's scale back the expectations a little bit. I think anything 700 rushing yards, 750 rushing yards, 300 receiving yards, 400 receiving yards, seeing a little bit more of an increased workload, 40% of the snaps. I think he's only ever really played 20 to 30 based off of the research I was doing earlier on him throughout the course of his career. That's solid. I mean, that's probably what they'll get out of a running back that they still might draft. So not really too many faults with this. This is a very high upside move as low risk, just in terms of pure investment, like you noted, Brad. And then finally, Cordarrelle Patterson, my friend. Since Devin Hester left all of those years ago, fun fact, Cordarrelle Patterson has more return touchdowns at Soldier Field than the Bears do in the last 7 seasons.
Wow. What, 2? One with the Vikings and one with the Patriots?
Well, no, 2. Didn't he one with the Vikings, one with the Patriots. Exactly. So 2. So he has more than the Bears do in each of the last 7 seasons since Devin Hester left Chicago. What do you like about this deal? What do you like about this move?
So Patterson, I say, admittedly, they gave him a decent chunk of change, because I do foresee his role being pretty gadgety. I honestly think, the way Belichick used him is the way Pace is going to use him. He is a wide receiver technically, but at this point, he's as much of a running back as he is a wide receiver. And when you put him in a Matt Nagy offense, I mean, he might punt. I don't even know. But I memean, the biggest thing for me is the thing you mentioned. I mean, our kick return game had to be one of the worst in the NFL last year, and he's a specialist, and we Bears fans know the value of that. Probably better than anyone else. This offense is better than Rex Grossman's offense, and so it's not like he's going to be the offense like Hester was, but I mean, an occasional just good return for good field position, it would make a huge boost for this offense and keep them on the field, which would then help the defense. It's one of those things. The special teams is underrated, and the special teams was very bad for the Bears last year. So it was a lot of money, 2 years, $10 million for I want to say 31-year-old guy who, I mean, his game is predicated on speed and he's, getting up there in age. They did pay the man. But I think that, it's one of those naggy pieces where it's just like, I mean, how much fun is this going to be?
Yeah, and I think how that huge chunk of change, what you can paint a good picture of is, it's the epitome of a win now move. In almost any other case, you're not paying a kick returner $5 million. You're not giving him a $5 million APY, using some of your terminology, Brad. You're not making that kind of investment. And the fact that Patterson even also wanted to come to the Bears and had glowing respective commentary of what the Bears have in Chicago. I think his official thing at his introductory press conference today was, I wanted to be a part of that culture. That means a lot coming from a guy that just won the Super Bowl with the Patriots, was a valuable member. That means a lot from coming from arguably the best football culture that there is with Bill Belichick and company. So It's a hefty investment, but like you said, you take the boost in kick return yardage. You take those extra 3 to 4 touches for all those people in on my Twitter feed, to offensive touches, where you have a little bit more offensive explosiveness, a little bit more of a lateral game with Tariq Cohen and Patterson, and you run with it. And that's that extra element that can really make you dangerous, that can make a one and done playoff run turn into a Super Bowl championship. It's that kind of extra. You can never have too many field tilters. And Patterson, for as limited as he might be in his skill set is still very, very good under its own prism, is one of the best field tilters that there is in the NFL. I don't have too many faults with that, and it'll just be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Moving on, Brad. So we've done each of the Bears signings. So let's go here by division league, best and worst signings, best or moves that, things that stuck out to you, negotiations that stuck out to you, what have you. Let's start right in the NFC North. So aside from the Bears, you have the Packers, Lions, and Vikings. What moves stuck out to you? What did you like that happened in the rest of the old school North division?
Yeah, so I'll be totally honest. I think the Packers are having a really strong offseason, and you can't forget they also have 2 first-round draft picks. One of which, their own, I want to say it's 12th overall, is probably the highest they've picked in like a decade.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, Preston Smith and Zadarius Smith, 2 great, edge players. I mean, the biggest weakness of the Packers was their edge rush. Clay Matthews obviously got up there in age and couldn't really do it anymore. And Nick Perry just, injuries and really struggled ever since he got his contract. And, there were rumors last year they were trying to get in the max sweepstakes, trying to get in a lot of sweepstakes. And I think that they really just couldn't pay any more to their edge than they already had, with Matthews and Perry.
Mm-hmm.
But once they got through last year, they were like, all right, we're revamping this position in a big way. They also added some offensive line help. They're known for their great tackles, but their interior is definitely not the strongest. And they signed a guy. I apologize.
Billy Turner.
Yep. So just a lot of good touch-ups, and I think it's interesting to see the Packers make moves. Ted Thompson just didn't. And so Brian Gutekunst has had a different approach and has been pretty aggressive. And I would say that I am a fan of what he's done. I think he's calculated, and I think that Preston Smith, for me, I actually think I would, based on value, if we're going to look at contracts, I actually think was maybe a better value contract than Zadarius Smith. I think Smith kind of reminds me of a Pernell McPhee.
Wait, which Smith?
Zadarius. Oh, you're right. Sorry, Zadarius Smith from the Ravens. He's kind of just like he can pass rush. That's about all he can do, though. He's very good at it, but he's pretty limited elsewhere. Preston Smith can do a lot of things. I can do a lot of things well, and we're the Ryan Kerrigan hive in here, you and I, and so I think he probably learned some good stuff from Kerrigan in Washington. Preston Smith did. So the Packers definitely are having a strong offseason. Lions on.
Hold on, before we move to the Lions, you didn't address the elephant in the room. What do you make of the Adrian Amos signing?
Oh wow, I can't believe that just happened. So I mean, I think, I mean, it's a lot of money on the total deal. It is only $12 million guaranteed, though. So it's one of those classic contracts where everyone it looks huge, and in reality, less than a third of it is fully guaranteed. It's 4 years, $37 million. So $9.25 million APY. But in reality, there's some outs after year 2. I mean, it's a lot of money. We're all Bears fans. I think it's a consensus, honestly, that he's a super solid player. He's rarely out of position. He barely misses a snap, since he's been a Bear. But I mean, now it's second tier safety money after this offseason. But I mean, last year that would have been like he would have been a top 5 or probably top 10, highest paid safety in the history of the NFL. So I mean, it's a lot of money.
Is that money you would have given him if you were Ryan Pace?
Absolutely not, and they couldn't, and I think that's what I read a report again. I don't know if this is true, but that they were in talks a lot, and he just had a price point that they just couldn't meet, And I think that's fair. I mean, I like Adrian Amos. I think at the right price, I would have been very happy bringing him back, but this was not that price.
So this is the case where you have a lot of Bears and Packers Twitter arguing over what is basically a safety swap. I realize that Clinton-Dix featured for the second half of the 2018 season with Washington, but it is otherwise essentially a safety swap of Amos and Clinton-Dix, where both teams didn't really get worse at safety. Both guys are quality starting options.
It's truly a fascinating study in like sociology, because every Packers fan loves to bash Clinton-Dix.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say Bears fans love to bash Amos, but they all don't think he's as good as a lot of people do outside of Chicago. Yeah, so it's really funny, because I mean, whatever happens is going to be talked about between the fan groups for the whole year at least. But yeah, so my Packers friends I talked to, couldn't have said anything worse about Clinton-Dix if they tried. They think he's just, it's funny. They're kind of the opposite. They basically think he just flies around and takes risks, and for every great play, like an interception, he has 5 terrible plays. And it's, Amos is kind of the opposite. He doesn't really make any mistakes, but there's also not, like you talk about, he doesn't tilt the field. He doesn't make those, his ball skills are limited. He's limited in coverage, but he's solid. And so it's like, you're paying a guy to be a somewhat of a box safety and somewhat limited in coverage, which is what matters in 2019, but you're paying him premier safety money. So I mean, yeah, it is what it is.
Let's move over to the Lions. Before I cut you off, what did you make of their moves?
Sure. So I love the Justin Coleman signing, the slot corner out of Seattle Seahawks. I've been talking about this for a long time, but I still think that position market is going to explode. We haven't had some of the premier guys come up for new contracts yet. I mean, Bryce Callahan's obviously one of them, but he's also a former, undrafted free agent with injury issues. He's not, a premier guy coming up at the position. So now that we've finally seen those guys get paid, the reason why I like it is, only a couple of years ago with Aaron Colvin, was it like, all right, we're going to pay a guy at corner to be a slot corner with no intention of moving him outside. And, we saw Tavon Young with the Ravens get $8.6 million per year. Coleman comes in at $9 million. So the Lions did make him the highest paid slot corner of all time. But what I'm saying is, in 2 or 3 years, now that it's a respected trend to pay the position, that deal could be a total discount. Those guys could be getting the $13 million that an outside corner gets if they are great enough at slot corner. So I think they're kind of just jumping in ahead of a trend a bit, which I like. Trey Flowers, it is a ton of money, but that's kind of we talk about positional value a lot. And, we joke about running backs getting taken second overall. One of the reasons for that aspect is premier position guys don't hit free agency, but when they do, they have to get overpaid. It isn't overpay, but it's not an overpay. It's what his market is, because if you're a good pass rusher and you're hitting free agency, which almost never happens, someone's going to spend, buku money on you. And so, I mean, 5 years, $18 million a year, $90 million total with, I want to say like 41 or something like that guarantee, it's a huge, huge contract. And, he's a great player, sure. But that's what happens. That's why you want to try and draft those guys. That's why you want to find, pass rusher and of course, quarterback and left tackle and all of that. You don't want to be paying for those guys in free agency. And, that's kind of why.
To Minnesota, I get the sense that there really isn't much of anything to analyze, because they kind of got worse, or they really haven't made any noise, which, depending on how you look at it, could be good or bad. It depends if you're a glass half full or glass half empty person.
They did have the interesting. No, it's true, but I think you might be forgetting, because I made a note to not forget. Anthony Barr did not go to the Jets.
Right, but that's a retention. I did not forget, so that's what I say. That's just retaining a guy you had.
I got you. So I was almost saying like it was an addition for 12 hours. It was an addition.
Yeah. Okay.
No, I know. I didn't mean to like call you off, but yeah, no. So interesting, because I mean, it wasn't. It's what I want to say like 13 and a half. I think it was 5 years, 67 and a half off the top of my head. Definitely a good chunk of change. And I know some Vikings fans, we're talking about, fans of and their opinions on their own players. I know they don't think Barr is incredible. That's a lot of money because they are one of the, their financial situation's tight. So they, they really must like him, to have, kind of ripped him out of the Jets' hearts. And I know you hate the term legal tampering, but I'm glad that we had an example of a guy, showing you these deals are not final. So it's cool to see. No, I guess cool might be the wrong word for Jets fans, but it's interesting to see a guy, not actually, adhere to that contract. It can happen.
Let me throw a curveball at you. I get the sense that the Vikings are in salary cap hell, and a good portion of it is because they're invested in a quarterback that maybe probably, at least in my opinion, isn't the answer in Kirk Cousins. And they're kind of hoping for the same thing that the Bears are hoping for with internal development, with a lot of their other younger guys and a lot of their other veterans, which is maybe a foolhardy prospect. Is that how you would attribute this? Is Cousins' contract hampering them?
I mean, it is a big contract, but I think that conversation has kind of gotten carried away a little bit. The whole, like, you can't, fill out a roster with a high paid quarterback. That's not really true. I mean, the thing is that was kind of their pushing all their chips to the center of the table move last year. And so I don't think they expected to be in the position they're in at all. I mean, if you told them they were going to miss the playoffs last year, they probably would have, laughed in your face. And so it's tough now because they're kind of in limbo. Because they have, a lot of money invested in this team. So they kind of need to stay win now, but they kind of do have to just rely on, drafting well and development from their own. They did let go Andrew Sendejo, their safety, but apparently their young safety behind him, everyone raves about. Again, I'm sorry for blanking on his name, but so they tendered him. I think they may have even given a first round tender for a safety. If not, it was second round. I want to say his name is Anthony Harris. I'm sorry if I'm just making stuff up right now, but they're super high on him. They had no issues letting Sendejo go whatsoever. They almost thought this guy was better last year. So stuff like that, yeah, they have to rely on. We'll see. They got rid of Mike Remmers, their left tackle, so they have holes for sure. But they just don't really have any money to fill them. So yeah, they got to do some stuff internally.
We have official comment from Anthony Barr on why he came back to the Vikings after initially agreeing to a deal with the Jets. Quote, "It was like you're about to go down the altar and marry the wrong woman." End quote. I mean, I enjoy the obvious pettiness. I'm not even gonna lie. So, but yeah, that seems to about characterize where the Jets are at. We'll get to them in a little bit, I imagine. Brad, best and worst, to keep this rolling along, best and worst deal in the NFC East.
But in the NFC specifically, okay. So I would say the best deal in the NFC East. Let's see here. So you had it's definitely not Landon Collins going to the Skins for 6 years, $84 million.
What? Come on, dude.
I think that's definitely in the conversation for worst. Oh, I'm sorry. No, the worst deal is obvious. The New York Giants just signed Golden Tate to a 4-year, $37.5 million contract.
Mm-hmm.
The only other receiver on their roster who's any good is Sterling Shepard, who I believe is also a purely slot receiver. Maybe he's getting moved to the outside, but that would be news to me. Just days after trading away Odell Beckham and seemingly going back into a rebuild, because they've shifted from win now to rebuild about 19 times at this point. So giving Golden Tate a almost $10 million deal, a 31-year-old Golden Tate, he'll be 31 when the season starts. A 4-year deal with $23 million guaranteed and a $9.375 million APY. It just doesn't make sense. I know people love to pile on Gettleman, and the Giants fans now are kind of like, all right, well, you're hating every single thing we're doing, so maybe you Twitter experts need to just shut up. But it's not about the moves individually; it's about the overall picture, and there's just no direction. I mean, I almost tried to defend, the Odell Beckham and the Vernons, and just, all right, well, at least they're finally hitting the reset button. At least, yes, they're carrying $24 million in dead money just from Odell and Vernon, but maybe they're finally going to just break this thing down and just build it back up. And then they go out and sign. They added Marcus Golden too, who's a great player. And that was in my opinion a great signing. It's a 1-year deal. But what are you doing? Are you trying to win right now, or are you trying to get a new quarterback and tank. And they're just, one of the worst positions to be in any sport is right in the middle. When you're kind of that like late playoff team / like 15th, 16th best team in the league, it's the worst place to be in because you don't get good draft capital and you didn't do anything. And so they're kind of just continually, well, they're not even in that good. They're more like 4-12, but they have to pick a direction and stick with it. And they just, that tape deal is the opposite of doing that.
So what's the best deal?
The best deal from the NFC East. Let's see here.
I'll add the caveat to this. There doesn't have to be a good deal. There doesn't have to be one. So you don't have to pick one that's merely the best of the litter. If there's one, if you don't like everything in it, you are the future GM here, Brad. So you can be judicious and you don't have to pick something that's the best just because.
The whole division, it's a quiet division. Well, besides the Giants, but the Eagles, are obviously trying to do whatever they can, but have very little room. I did like the Malik Jackson signing, 3 years, $30 million. But the caveat was they but they traded Michael Bennett, who was on a deal that had a $7.2 million cap hit. They traded him to the Patriots, your favorite evil empire, and. I mean, in my opinion, those players are pretty much the same. If not, Bennett might be even a little bit better. And they replace him with a guy who they're paying more, who's new to the team and all of that. So as much as I like the Malik Jackson addition, it's just like, well, why don't you just stick with Michael Bennett if you wanted that type of player? But yeah, I mean, the Redskins are obviously trying to figure out, who knows what they're doing, with Alex Smith. And then, of course, the Giants, like I said, are, kind of just moving in circles. But yeah, so if I had to pick one, I would say Malik Jackson. But that division's going through an interesting, very interesting facelift this offseason.
To the NFC West, a little bit less activity there for Seattle, San Francisco, Arizona, and Los Angeles. What best and worst deals there?
So I would say best deal, it's got to be Tevin Coleman. It's 2 years, $8.5 million. And, he reunites with Shanahan, who he clearly loves. It's impressive. I almost was kind of wondering what I'm missing. Coleman, from what I was told, in some people's eyes, was almost viewed as the number one running back in free agency, for those people that weren't in on Le'Veon Bell and, didn't kind of trust what he was going to bring to the table. And Coleman got less money than a 29-year-old Mark Ingram coming off a suspension. I mean, it's just a steal. I mean, they obviously paid McKinnon last year, and so, they probably didn't want to be back in this position again. But, I mean, boy, did they find a great way to, replace that, if they do move on from McKinnon. So that's got to be the best. I think the Cardinals have made a lot of nice moves. They obviously have to fix a lot of holes in that team, but trying to bolster the offensive line, just a bunch of middle tier guys, there. They just signed I'm trying to think, the 49ers, going back to them, they just signed Jordan Matthews. They're kind of bolstering up that wide receiver core for Garoppolo. Yeah, there's not really a bad move because like you said, it's been a pretty quiet. The Seahawks haven't done much of anything. And then who am I forgetting? The Rams also. What they brought back, that's probably worse. They brought back Fowler on a 1 year, I want to say $14 million deal. I mean, of course, not a ton of risk, but with a team that's, again, going to try to go for a Super Bowl. I mean, he did look good when he was there at the end of the year. And I guess, pretty much earned this 1 year prove it deal, but it's a lot of money to give, to a guy when you're trying to, push all your chips to the table and, go for a Super Bowl again.
I realize exactly. You bring up a good point. We won't have the same luxury of going best and worst deal necessarily for every division. For those hopping in and around, this is the Blitz Network Radio. I'm here with future GM, TBN Cap Wizard, Brad Spielberger. You can follow him on Twitter at BradOCC. Follow me on Twitter at Robert Siklinski, and follow us on Twitter at the BlitzNet. So, Brad, with the NFC South, you can just give me your most notable move and what you thought of it.
Sure. Yeah. So it's more, well, the way I looked at it, and we can look at it, is like kind of what's the power dynamic in the division now. So kind of how has the power shifted? Saints today, it's looking like Sheldon Rankins, their defensive tackle, who was having a breakout year last year, had 8 sacks in the regular season. He tore his Achilles in the second playoff game they had against the Eagles. And I mean, for a big guy like that, he might be out the entire season. So they signed Malcolm Brown, the defensive tackle with the Patriots, to a 3-year, $15 million deal. I think it's a good little signing. They also have no space. They cleared some room today with another Drew Brees restructure. They've done that about 10 times at this point. And talk about future cap hell. When he retires, they're just gonna be paying the piper. But that was a good replacement signing. The Buccaneers, lost Humphreys, so have made no wide receiver moves there. But I do like them just kind of going all in on that offensive line they have. Donovan Smith, it did look like a ton of money when he first got it. I'm blanking on the details, but I know I think it's like 13-14 million a year. And then, Trent Brown came out and got the 4-year, $66 million, or excuse me. Trent Brown got the massive contract from the Raiders, which made Smith's look not top of the line anymore. So it made it a pretty good value signing there. But again, one of the quieter divisions was the NFC South, and the Falcons have done pretty much nothing. And the Panthers. Excuse me, Matt Paradis.
I was hoping you would. I was setting you up for this. Come on, man. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll be more organized here. But yeah, so Matt Paradis, the center, the Carolina Panthers signed. Phenomenal signing. It's one of my favorite of all of free agency so far. 3 years, $21 million. They swooped in. He was apparently about to sign with either the Jets or the Bills, and they kind of came in last minute and just swooped him up. Anything you can do to bolster the interior offensive line of the Carolina Panthers for Cam Newton's life, I think is a great move. He's a really good player. Was in Denver last year, and that was probably my favorite signing of the division for sure.
Looks like the Panthers are in. Puts on sunglasses. Paradise.
Ayo.
I saw the pun you made on that, and I wasn't going to amplify it, but I'm amplifying it here.
I appreciate that.
Okay. Let's move over to the AFC. AFC's biggest movers and shakers. We obviously have one of the biggest dominoes here. So what did you think, Brad, of the Le'Veon Bell situation? Did he win? Did he play himself? Or is it something probably more in the middle?
I'm glad we're talking about this because, it's the hottest topic. The thing is, people want to make this black and white. You and I have talked about it. Okay, from a financial perspective, I think objectively you could say he lost. You can say that. He would have made $14.5 million guaranteed last year. And, even if he got hurt, unless it was catastrophic, I mean, we saw Earl Thomas. Earl Thomas made $9 million last year, broke his leg in week 3. And still signed, a great contract, like 4 years, 55, 57, something like that. So, he showed that you can, risk it per se. But again, it's a playmaking safety versus a running back. So, with the Le'Veon Bell thing, the other issue with this whole discussion is that people want to talk about the Steelers contract, even though they don't understand the Steelers contract. So the rumor there was that it was 4 years. I don't even remember the total value, but the whole argument was that in the first 2 years, he would have made $33 million. So it's basically the same as the full guarantees in the Jets deal. But Le'Veon Bell was only interested in fully guaranteed money and getting it at signing. The Steelers do honor their contract, so he probably would have made it through 2 years. But the upfront guarantee in that deal was $17 million. And the upfront guarantee in the Jets deal was around $25 million. So from Le'Veon Bell's perspective, the only thing he cares about was guaranteed money right away. So that for him, it's a win. He probably forwent some, if that's a word, some money.
That is not a word, but people will know what you meant.
Perfect. I figured you would check me on that one. So, but he still, okay, he still got paid the second highest average running back contract of all time. So everyone just slam dunking it as a total loss, I just think is disingenuous. And yes, he could have made more money, correct. All he cared about was having assurance that he would get a good chunk of money and have a large contract before because he's 27 years old. He's a running back who has historic, carry and reception numbers. He wanted to get a big deal with a big guaranteed amount, and he got it. So, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Is it also? How much do you think of how much do you think his personal animosity and probably maybe bad faith negotiations that he had with Pittsburgh? Would you say any of that played into the situation? Because that is something that he specifically pointed out uh, as all of this developed.
So that's also a good point too. So he, he agreed to the tag the first time, played on the tag. It was going to be his sixth NFL season. He was a former second round pick. Going to be a sixth NFL season where he still had never actually negotiated for his own contract. And we're talking about the position in the NFL that has the shortest, career life of any position in the league. So yeah, I think he felt like, I did the guarantee. I'm sorry, I did the franchise tag once. I showed up. I had an incredible year. Like, please, in a gesture of good faith, kind of give me a great deal. And again, going back to the Steelers, though, I will say, while they don't give a lot of guaranteed money at all, among the least in the NFL, they do honor their contracts more than any other, based on basically how long they keep a guy on the roster after they sign a contract. It is the longest in the NFL. If they pay you, they will work with you. They'll keep you around. They want you to be a part of the team long term, and they're not just willy nilly cutting guys a lot. They'll let you stick around. So, but Le'Veon was not interested in that, and they just couldn't kind of bridge that gap. But going for past that with the whole hullabaloo with Roethlisberger and all of that, I mean, yeah, there's clearly a hierarchy in that team and in that locker room that I haven't heard of, is normally a thing. Is Tom Brady getting more leeway than an undrafted free agent on the Patriots? Yes. But I mean, you're not seeing the GM come out and say, like, these kids need to listen to Tom Brady because he's been to five. That's not a thing. And so they just feel disrespected. And I think that the last point I'll have on Le'Veon Bell is, in my opinion, the Antonio Brown trade does not happen without Le'Veon Bell. And, that is because, Antonio Brown can say, hey, I'm just going to not show. If you guys don't trade me, I'm just going to not show up. And that threat is real because it literally just happened to them. So, and that it created a whole new market. It created a whole new everything. So Le'Veon also, last point, he wasn't thinking just about himself. He was thinking about not only the running back position, but also just every future NFL player. And that's getting lost on so many people is, yeah, he did get a little bit less money than he thought he was going to get. And he wanted to get a 4-year, whatever, $70 million deal. And he didn't get that. But I mean, he changed the game in a way, and other players should appreciate what he did, in my opinion.
That's an excellent point, Brad. And I had this follow up queued up. Do you think the franchise tag is used as originally intended? And do you think it should go away?
So it's interesting. I think that it's funny because, like we talked about earlier about, the new CBA negotiations in 2021, is the thing you have to remember is, as, quote unquote, predatory as the franchise tag is, it is still fully guaranteed money at a very high amount. So it's kind of, first world problems, so to speak. So, I mean, yeah, he turned down $14 million that if he was there the first day, even if he, something happened to him the second day, he would have got it. But when it's, when you can do them multiple years in a row, that I don't like. I think it should be a one-time thing only. I mean, DeMarcus Lawrence apparently is furious. It just happened to him in Dallas for the second time. I think Cousins, when you're a quarterback and it's 25, when it's a huge amount of money, I think you're more okay with it. In quarterbacks, if you're good enough, you're going to have a market, even with an injury, unless it's catastrophic, you're probably still going to have a market. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to say I want to get rid of it, because the thing is, it impacts so few players, and it impacts the premier players, so they're bothered by it. But whenever you think of, the CBA negotiations, the things that, bring down the money for the top guys, in theory, is supposed to help boost the money for the guys that down at the bottom. So, if you were, for example, if you're going to go say, hey, Mike Davis, what do you think about the franchise tag? Do you hate it? He'd be like, I don't care, because it's never going to affect me ever a day in my life. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So, and to him, it's like 2 years, $6 million is life-changing money, and I'm ecstatic. This guy's complaining about getting $14 million in one season. So, those dynamics make it kind of tough to just, outright say I don't like it.
I guess my general thought process is it's supposed to facilitate long-term deals. It's supposed to, or at least that's what I've always been told in following football and transitioning towards covering it. I've always been under the assumption that franchise tags legitimately facilitate long-term deals. And I'm now on year 12 of that, of following this dumb, often dumb league anyway. I say that lovingly. And it almost never really does. From my experience, I don't think I can really name a franchise tag that led to a long-term deal for a player. It's like you said, where it's just used multiple years in a row to where a team doesn't want to commit to a guy. And while, for me, you're throwing $14 million away. These are the premier players, whatever. You're throwing $15 million, whatever the franchise tag happens to be. You look stupid for not taking it, but that's exactly what exactly what the franchises, that's exactly what everybody else wants. These guys are the guys that are getting franchise tags are often the tops of their profession. They're often the tops at their position. And I don't blame them for wanting more security. And I don't blame them for seeing the tag as it's not really an aim to give them security. It's just to be able to, it's essentially what, like, for example, happens in the journalistic industry. Just, I don't know if you know this parallel, where you hand out a full-time freelance position. So you're getting all the pay, but you're not getting any benefits. You're not getting any of that. Not to get to veer off too much in the conversation, but it's essentially the same thing. The teams, you're using the tag to only make these 1-year commitments on the best in the game, and that to me is so ass backwards. I mean, that's just. I'll respectfully disagree on that one note.
No, for sure. And I think it's a bit of a different conversation. If we're talking about, are they being used for the original intended purpose? You asked that and I didn't get to it, so that's my bad. And the answer in general is no, like you said. But I mean, there's an example this year. I mean, D Ford got tagged. The Chiefs, I think, knew they were probably not going to keep him around, but it made them be able to negotiate a trade for him, and they obviously sent him to the 49ers, where he did then receive, a 5-year, $87.5 million deal. So, there's an example of it working perfectly. But no, yeah, I mean, I'm with you. In an overall sense, it's not being used to facilitate long-term deals. It's like you said, teams that they like the guy and he's good, but they don't really trust him on a long-term basis, so they kind of just use it as a cop-out, which is not what it was intended for.
Let's move over to the AFC North. Most notable move there might be obvious, so let's break it down. Odell Beckham trade. We kind of touched on a little bit with the Giants and what they did a little bit earlier in Gettleman's thought process. But how does this look from the Browns' perspective? And how does all of this kind of piece together?
Yeah, so the AFC North has to be by far the most interesting, I think, division so far in free agency, both for who the teams have gained and lost. Starting with Odell Beckham, the Browns are having a phenomenal offseason in my opinion. With two of the trades, the Odell Beckham trade and also the getting Olivier Vernon, who people like to bash because he's not a huge contract. He's a good player. He might not be worth the giant money that he got, but he's good. And so, all right, sorry, I'm all over the place. All right, Odell Beckham. So, like I just mentioned with, if Le'Veon doesn't sit out, then Antonio Brown doesn't get traded. If Antonio Brown doesn't get traded, this Odell Beckham deal, in my opinion, does not happen. So we're seeing a new market where teams are willing to trade, their top guys who are unhappy, who they're not really happy with also, even though they just signed him to a monster contract, and the Giants are going to carry $16 million in dead money this year for Odell Beckham. But I mean, they're essentially cutting bait. And the thing is, the reason why the Browns like it is because, they don't have to negotiate a contract. They did give him a little bit of a bonus boost, but they don't have to negotiate a full contract with the guy. The Giants already signed him to 5 years, 90. And now I think that's right. So all they have to do is come in and just acquire great talent, give him a little bit of bonus money, but they don't have to worry about for the next couple of years he's locked in. And if you look at it this way, I mean, he's on an $18 million a year deal, and CJ Mosley just signed a $17 million a year deal as an inside linebacker. So it's a good deal. And as for the compensation in return, first, third, and Landon Collins, I actually think and Jabril Peppers, that's a pretty good return. The Browns pick is 17th overall, and then they have the third, and they replaced, that's why I was thinking Landon Collins. They replaced Landon Collins in the trade with a guy on his rookie deal who, I mean, they are going to have a similar fight they just had with Collins in 2 years on Peppers, but that's beside the point. But it's kind of, in my opinion, a bit of a, it's hard to call it a win for the Giants. I mean, you just got rid of a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, but for how bad the situation had gotten, for how much Odell and the Giants did not see eye to eye, did not like each other. I mean, they got good compensation, and they got rid of a guy that they just didn't really want to deal with anymore.
I guess from that perspective, a big trend, going back to the Browns, that is, a big trend in the recent years in the NFL has been teams with young quarterbacks they believe in. And I mean, unless you're terrible at football evaluations, you should probably believe in Baker Mayfield in his future. Teams with young quarterbacks that they believe in have heavily invested in the rookie quarterback contract window when they can pay their best player, or most important player anyway, the least amount of money while filling out the rest of the roster. Is that what the Browns have done here? Because they also, like we've also discussed, they also made the Vernon deal. Is that what the Browns have done here? Is that the picture you would paint?
Yeah, 100%. And another signing I really liked was the Browns bringing in Sheldon Richardson from, was it the Vikings last year? No, with the Seahawks.
Sheldon Richardson?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So he was with both at one point. But, the Jets and then the Seahawks. So, yeah, so they also brought in Sheldon Richardson, really solid defensive tackle. Their defensive front seven is pretty scary. I mean, obviously Myles Garrett's a stud. I'm a big fan of Larry Ogunjobi, and now he'll be next to Sheldon Richardson. The back end is still a little bit of a question mark. Denzel Ward's obviously a stud. I mean, I don't think they're done either. But no, yes, they are. Sorry, to answer your question, that is 100% what they're doing. It's what the Jets are doing. It's kind of what the Bills are doing. When you get a young rookie quarterback that you believe in, you put all your chips in the center of the table. And like you said, Baker Mayfield is a stud. I think if you don't believe that, you're probably not watching the same football that you and I are. And they had a ton of cap space. I mean, Sashi died for our sins. R.I.P. Sashi.
Stop it. Going too far. Oh man. Okay, let's jump to the AFC South. Any notable deals there? Most notable deals, most notable moves.
So let's see. We had the Texans, who lost their entire secondary. You had Tyrann Mathieu leave, Kareem Jackson leave. They're in a weird holding pattern. They have a ton of money and they haven't really done anything. I guess, I follow and interact with the Texans cap guy, and I guess from a cash perspective, they were not as fluid as they were cap wise, but I think it's kind of surprising to some fans to not see them. They made the playoffs. They have again, we're talking about the rookie quarterback. They have that, in a pretty solid Deshaun Watson, and they had a ton of cap room and really haven't done much, which has been interesting. The Titans have made a lot of nice moves. They brought in, they bolstered the offensive line. They already had 2 great tackles in Taylor Lewan, and of course I'm blanking on his name now. But they signed some interior guys. They also brought in Adam Humphries, who was reported the Patriots offered $10 million a year to. So I think if Bill Belichick offers a guy $10 million a year and you can get him and also get him for less than that, I think that's an A+. I think we just have to say that definitively. So they've made a lot of nice moves for an offense that needs more of those reliable hands guys, just like shorter routes. I'm not making the classic white slot receiver guy joke, but I mean, Corey Davis, I think, is a good receiver, but there was just no pieces around him. And I think Humphries is a great number 2. Jameis loved him in Tampa. He goes from the number 1 pick to the number 2 pick in that draft, which is kind of a weird connection. But so the Titans, I definitely like in that division. Let's see, rest of the AFC South, who we got? Put me on the spot here. I'm trying to just think off the top of my head.
Yeah, you're a future GM. You're supposed to know
everybody.
You're supposed to know everybody in the league. Dude.
I know. So we got the Jags. I mean, Foles. Again, we talked about overpaying Trey Flowers, but in reality, it's not an overpay because that's just what happens. So same thing with Foles. He's a quarterback. So what is 4 years, $88 million. So I mean, we'll see. I think it's going to be hilarious to see what happens there. If he's great and proves all the, Foles magic stuff true, and if he's terrible and proves that he was just in a great situation with a great offensive line, with great weapons and great coaching. Great. I think it's going to be the latter. but we'll find out. Yeah, I mean they lost Malik Jackson. The Jaguars did. They're kind of also kind of in a bit of limbo. They like sort of put their chips in the center of the table when they made the AFC Championship run, but they also thought Blake Bortles was a good enough quarterback to make a Super Bowl, so that kind of set them back a bit. But yeah, so that's. Am I missing anybody in the AFC South?
I don't believe so. AFC West, my friend, the most aggressive team, the Las Vegas Grudens, or no, I still think they're the Bay Area Grudens, but they soon will be the Las Vegas Grudens. I'd imagine they lead your analysis there in that division.
Yeah, they have to, right? So, again, I talked about, people love to, bash Gruden, and a lot of the times it is fair. Not just the Khalil Mack trade. They also just cut Jordy Nelson, who they probably shouldn't have signed in the first place. They got rid of Martavis Bryant, who they traded a 3rd-round pick for. They cut A.J. McCarron, who they gave a 5th-round pick for, and they're trying to rebuild. So there's a lot of bad there. But I think the Tyrell Williams signing, 4 years, $44 million, is a great deal. I tweeted it was the first deal of free agency that I was actually surprised at how low it was as opposed to how big it was. $11 million for a wide receiver is not that much money anymore, and he was arguably the best guy on the market. They pair him with Antonio Brown, so two guys that can run some great deep routes for Derek Carr, who doesn't throw the ball further than 10 yards. So that'll be interesting to see. So yes, the Antonio Brown trade. From the Raiders' perspective, again, like with Odell, they did have to give him some bonuses, but that's such a no-brainer trade for the Raiders. It was a 3rd and a 5th for a future Hall of Famer, top 5 wide receiver of all time. I mean, I genuinely don't think Antonio Brown is actually as much of a head case as people are making him out to be.
He was trying to get traded.
100%.
He's a diva. He's a diva, but he was definitely up in the ante on the divaness to ruin his own value. So yep. Something like this would happen. Let's be real.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, he shows up. No more blonde mustache, like fresh haircut, and you do whatever you want. But I agree. I think he was totally just forcing his way out of Pittsburgh. And then I will say, the Trent Brown is an overpay. I mean, you saw, Nate Solder gets the biggest left tackle contract of all time, coming off, the Patriots Super Bowl run last year with the Giants. Of course, isn't as good with the Giants as he was with the Patriots, and the best offensive line coach in football, Dante Scarnecchia. So naturally, Gruden falls for the exact same trap and signs Trent Brown to the biggest left tackle contract of all time. People are definitely high on Brown. I think he's a good player, but he's going from Dante Scarnecchia to I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. Everyone's favorite offensive line coach. They love to trash.
Oh, Tom Cable.
Right. You're right. Who is maybe one of the worst offensive line coaches in football. So, is he going to be as productive? No, he's not. And they paid him a ton of money. But they had to redo this whole team. But again, with that one, you draft Colton Miller in the 1st round last year. 15th overall pick, if I remember correctly. And he's supposed to be the left tackle of the future, and you give up on him after a season. So, I mean, of course, they're gonna put him on the right side. He could turn out great, but it's just like it's a lot more that just lack of direction kind of stuff. I think there was someone put on Twitter that Gruden had a quote like, Colton Miller's going to be a great left tackle. It was like a week. He said that a week before they signed Trent Brown. So, that type of stuff, kind of negatively impacts it. But they've had a good. I think it's they've had a good offseason. That team is going to be better than they were last year, that's for sure, which is unfortunate, for the Bears pick. But, that's objectively they've gotten better. The Chargers haven't done much of anything. The Chiefs have had, Tyrann Mathieu, again, a lot of money. I think they gave Sammy Watkins a ton of money last year. I like Tyrann Mathieu's fit there, but you're losing Berry, Houston, and Ford.
You know what the Chiefs should do with their limited pass rush? Sign Justin Houston.
Right. Well, they already gave him a 5-year, $100 million deal a long time ago. So, or whatever, 6 years, $100 million. So, yeah. I mean, well, who knows? Maybe they're trying to maybe convince him to come back after they cut him. But no. But yeah. So with them, it's like you can look at the nice signings, but they're losing a lot of players on a defense that already wasn't good at all last year. So. And they lost Mitch Morse, their center, went to the Bills, which was a nice signing for the Bills as well. I touched on them a bit earlier, but yeah, so the Chiefs, they obviously have a good team, AFC Championship overtime, but more losses than gains there for sure.
I have two follow-ups on the whole Brown predicament as it relates to the league, Brad. In regards to Brown in regards to Brown, this was something that happened with Beckham as well, where both the Giants and Steelers are now paying at least 18% of their cap to not have two top 5 receivers on their team for 2019. They basically killed at least 18% of their cap to trade away these guys. And that's it's obviously bad management. The Giants got a better return. The Steelers got not really that much. Is this a common thing? Is this something that you've seen a lot before? Is this the kind of trend that we might see develop?
Yeah, no. So this is basically brand new. I'm sure someone could find an example, but of an extreme circumstance where a team traded a guy that they, like a top of the line guy like an Odell Beckham and an Antonio Brown, basically very recently receiving a new contract. With Browns, it was a restructure, funnily enough, to make room for Le'Veon Bell. But so carrying huge dead money cap hits, it's not, no one's trying to do that ever. I think, again, the reason why I'm also critiquing the Giants' approach with then signing Golden Tate is, the Bills had $50 million in dead money last year, but they were tanking for all intents and purposes. So if you're going to take on the dead money because you're more just like, why pay real cash to a guy if we can just kind of clear everybody out, save real dollars and cents, and because we're limited on the cap, with the dead money, just kind of, just basically tank. NFL teams don't tank per se, but just kind of go into a known down year. But so when you're doing with the Giants, like I said, $24 million between Vernon and Beckham alone, that would have been great if they decided to just like be bad this year. Like maybe have 2 first-rounders this year and be bad and try and get in the 2-off sweepstakes and maybe just flip the whole script. But instead, you go out and sign Golden Tate, which takes away one of their compensatory picks. It takes one of the Giants away, and it gives $23 million guaranteed. You're paying real cash, and so it's okay, depending on what you do afterwards. And so the Steelers have done nothing in free agency. They're going to be still trying to win now, but I don't think they're going to. They added Moncrief today, which is, a signing.
A signing. That's a ringing endorsement.
Yeah. So, yeah, the answer to the question is no, you want to avoid doing something like this at all costs. Absolutely. But there are circumstances where you're willing to take on dead money if it fits, what you're trying to do, because people have to remember that, dead money is money already paid. The real money's already been paid. So it's only a restraint on the salary cap. It's not a restraint on, the owner's, checkbook. So, if they didn't want to give a guy, let's say a bonus kicked in, a couple of days later, all right, yeah, we're going to carry dead money, but we're not going to give this guy real money, and we can spend this real money next year. So that's when it would make sense.
The other follow-up in regards to Brown, and Bill Barnwell from ESPN had a fantastic piece illustrating, not to harp too much on the bad faith negotiations, but where, like we were kind of touching on earlier with Bell, where they were pushing back commitments, and they did have some rolling guarantees built in and such, and that they've done this with players for years. And Brown in particular, after having the template set by Bell, like you stated, took more issue with that. He took more issue with that. And my thought process on this is, how prevalent is that kind of contract negotiation that the Steelers have done with some of their star players and have done with guys like this? How prevalent is that across the league? And is this something that we should keep an eye on 2 years from now in collective bargaining agreement negotiations?
So the Steelers are one of the more unique NFL teams in how they structure their contracts. So it's not super common, but teams are moving towards it. And by that, I mean giving as little guarantees as possible. For example, the Bucks don't give signing bonuses. I think it's funny when I mention that, people are like, wait, really? And they look at like a Mike Evans deal and there's 0 signing bonus. Isn't that crazy? So there are teams that do stuff like that, but I have to mention the Steelers do honor their contracts longer than other teams. So, they're basically, what they would say is, hey, we're not guaranteeing it because it could be a constraint on our cap, and we want to build a great team and, put other great guys around you. And we don't have to worry if in 2 years from now we have a bunch of dead money. We won't if we don't guarantee, but we promise we'll keep you around. But, and for a lot of players, that's fine. And that worked out fine. But Bell and Brown basically just said, I don't have faith that you're going to honor this contract no matter what, I guess, so they just wanted those assurances is what it comes down to. Is they didn't think the Steelers were going to cut them the next day. They probably weren't, but they just wanted an absolute guarantee that no matter what happens, I'm not trying to speculate on these two men's lives, but it's not just an injury with Le'Veon Bell. I don't know if he goes out and gets arrested or something. Teams can void guarantees. Teams can void money all the time. So, just getting fully guaranteed right up front, it just avoids that issue. So in terms of, are we going to see, shift toward that? Go look at Ryan Pace's contracts this offseason. He obviously hasn't signed any huge deals, but he really avoids signing bonuses as well. He doesn't like having prorated money, aka money moving down the line on any contract. And the way you make up for that is you guarantee some of the salary, or you give a roster bonus, that is guaranteed, so the player has some guaranteed money, but just in a different form. And so, yeah, I do think you're going to see it. Teams are going to avoid large signing bonuses for sure. It's just smart business.
All right, Brad, we're get into like a quick Twitter mailbag here in a bit, but what did 2019's free agency? There are still some moves to make. Like I said at the top, at the time of this recording, Justin Houston has not signed anywhere yet. By the time anyone who listens to this, Justin Houston might have a team, but obviously we can't account for that completely. But for the most part, like, the wave of free agency has passed through, and there'll be some more trickling additions, whatever, but we can basically make a full summation. What did 2019 free agency tell you about the NFL as a whole? What is your one main takeaway?
The main takeaway, honestly, is that these players are not messing around anymore. I wrote an article for the Blitznet, about every position in the league and basically the top free agents at that position and whether or not they were a threat to break, the highest average per year deal at that position. Of course, the salary cap goes up every year. So, I like to talk about adjusted salary cap as well. I posted where, like you mentioned, percentage of cap, which is smart. So, a $15 million a year deal in 2019 is different than a $15 million a year deal in 2015. So, but these guys, blew it out of the water. The safeties, number one, was just, to me, it was shocking. I didn't think anyone was going to beat Eric Berry's 13 million APY, and I think Thomas, Collins, and Matthew all did. Juwan James, the Dolphins. I forgot to mention the Broncos, so they had a pretty good offseason as well. Joe Flacco trade, notwithstanding, but he got the highest right tackle contract of all time by a good chunk. These players are not messing around. And I think you mentioned, several times that we're coming up on 2021. So maybe it's like, who cares? Let's just throw money around. But that's technically, if I'm gonna be a nerd real quick, not how it works. The guarantees they're giving in these deals, if there are guarantees that go into 2022 and beyond, there is an impact. They're not just going to let that fall by the wayside. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but regardless of what happens with a potential lockout or whatever, the money is still real. So yeah, it just shows these agents and players came to bat this year.
So what you're saying is the players win, Brad, unequivocally, right? That's what you're saying, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes, 100%. Everything is black and white in this beautiful world.
All right, let's wrap this up with a Twitter mailbag because there's some good questions here. The first one I advise you to tread lightly on, but we have to answer it. It's on Twitter, so that's just a rule. Bill Zimmerman from Sirius XM Radio asks, if Ryan Pace took a crap in a box and marked it guaranteed, would Arizona Cardinals GM Steve Keim sign it to a contract?
Oh boy. The Cardinals dynamic has been so fascinating to me. And I should say also, we didn't mention it at all, which is surprising. Kevin White signed to the Cardinals. I just want to say I know he's a guy that Bears fans like to rag on. He can't choose how his injuries are going to play out. And in my opinion, he hustled when he had an opportunity to do so last year. So I do wish him the best. Anyways, that's me avoiding your question entirely. Um, I mean, it seems like, again, I'm speculating. I have no idea, but it seems like others in that front office, have kind of supplanted him in a way. I mean, I know Rosen was his guy. The Murray rumors could be completely speculation, but if not, it kind of shows that, perhaps, I don't know, he lost some power, in that room. That's me. That's me avoiding it as best as possible.
Okay.
Thanks for the question, Bill.
Let's Mr. Pepper at salted_pepper asks, look into the future, parentheses, Bojack, Mitch. So Eddie Jackson Trubisky's contract's coming up. Assuming he's asking if everything goes well and they get their full extensions, they get those rich extensions we were talking about at the top of the show and have alluded to. Assuming both guys play 16 games this year and perform well, who's walking out? Who's more likely to walk after 2019? Danny Trevathan or Prince Amukamara?
So the issue is the term walk would imply that they're a free agent. So Amukamara is still going to have a year on his deal after this year. Trevathan does not. So
let's say get cut, walked, whatever. Who's more likely to be on the Bears in the 2020 season?
So I would vote Prince Amukamara if we're going to eliminate any, like what the designation is. But I would, so I'll just say, so Trevathan, I almost said he might not be back for this season. I walked that back, and I was totally wrong about that. I said it coming into the year, and he had, people forget, but Trevathan had a lot of injury issues early on in his tenure. I like him. I think he's a good player. But I was more just looking at it from the perspective of, you just drafted a middle linebacker 8th overall, and you're paying Trevathan $7 million a year. And yes, he's great, but I think early in his Bears career, he played like 10, 12 games a year. So it's clear he's an integral part of this defense. The players love him. He's a clear leader, in that middle linebacker spot. I'm sure he's been great for Smith's, growth. But I don't think they sign him to a new contract after this this year, unless it's probably a lower price tag than what he's already on right now. Whereas Amukamara, has his deal or his money for 2020 would be, I think $9 million. That's why I'd say he's less likely, because they're not paying him that, in my opinion. Again, very solid, good CB2. I think he's been a great addition to the Bears. He's probably honestly my favorite Twitter follow of the Bears. I think kind of a sleeper in that category. You hear about the Tariq Cohens and the Kyle Longs.
Wow, what a great evaluation tool, Brad. Wow, so good.
Just an aside, but they're probably not going to pay him that unless he has just a phenomenal year this year, and just like they can't not do it. So honestly, both are potential losses for 2020. But again, like you mentioned with Cordell Patterson earlier in the podcast, the players seem to love the culture that's being built around Hallis Hall these days. So, would Amukamara take a pay cut? Would Trevathan sign a cheaper deal to, make some playoff runs with the team that he, now has been on for a while? Maybe.
I think what you have to keep in mind with this situation too, if you have to pick one or the other, the Bears, ideally anyway, have who I believe they think is their long-term replacement at inside linebacker next to Roquan Smith with Joey Igbunue. They don't really have a boundary corner as of yet that could take Prince Amukamara's spot, at least not one that I think they're superiorly confident in. That depends on how you feel about Kevin Tolliver. I like him. I don't know that I'm in love with him. I don't know that I think he's the guy that's going to start next to Kyle Fuller for a good while. Joey Igbunue, by the time Trevathan would walk theoretically after this season, he again theoretically could be polished enough and have enough experience and have spent enough time on the bench and kind of polishing up on his craft to where he could take over. There really isn't that air in place for Amukamara, again, unless you believe in Kevin Tolliver. But as an undrafted free agent and the guy that kind of struggled in the moments he had last year, that to me is much more of a stretch than I realize Igbunue himself is still a special teamer at this moment. But they drafted him in the 4th round for a reason. That's a guy to me that they're absolutely grooming to be a future starter, and who was incredibly productive in college in that same sense.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I shouldn't. I keep just looking at it just purely based on the numbers, but yeah, when you make that point, I think that pretty much answers the question. I mean, I don't think they. Tolliver, like you said, he great athlete coming out of LSU. He's obviously has the ability to be a good player, but do they trust him to be their CB2 in 2020, which likely is again going to be a another push all your chips to the center of the table year? No, they don't. So yeah, so I think you nailed it.
Finally, Chuck Canning has a few questions here. Both of them are nice little cappers to our pod, our absolutely loaded free agent pod here with the future NFL GM. I'll keep saying that. Brad, your thoughts on Bears cap management. This is how Chuck puts it. Your thoughts on Bears cap management for 2020 to 2021. Do you see a reasonable path for signing each guy coming off their rookie deals without disturbing the rest of the core? Or will the Bears face a situation where they'll have to allow a good player to walk? So I guess in the sense he means each guy coming off rookie deals. So that would be who? Leonard Floyd. That'd be Eddie Jackson. That'd be Mitch Trubisky. I think maybe Cody Whitehair. You also have Tariq Cohen. You have a bunch of different guys. They're a bunch of probably your core talents. Do you see a reasonable path for signing each guy coming off their rookie deals without disturbing the rest of the Bears core?
I think it's a great question. And I think that I'm almost afraid to say this answer to you. But, I mean, of the group, I mean, the guy that's coming up the earliest and the guy that, while he has shown incredible flashes, has also –
Brad, don't you do it. Don't.
I mean, I know. I told you.
Brad.
I know. So
tread lightly.
So here's the thing, too. I'll make it more about numbers and less about your deep, heartfelt emotions. If Floyd has a good year, but they determine they just can't afford to pay him and Mac so much money, like I talked about, he'll get a great big deal somewhere else. Whereas like a center like Cody Whitehair or a scat back like Cohen will probably not. I think Eddie Jackson is one that at this point you can't even argue they're going to let him go. Like they're not. And then I mean I'll say it. I'm over here wearing a Trubisky jersey, so I'll be mean to myself as well. But I mean he still has to prove he's worth a long-term deal with a lot of money in it. That goes without saying. So I think they can make it. The question is, can they make it work? Yeah, of course. You can always find cap room. But do I think, a list of 5, Floyd, Whitehair, Cohen, Trubisky, Eddie Jackson, if I said, what's the odds that all 5 of those guys, get signed to their second contract with the Bears? I don't know, 75, 80%. It's not 100%.
Brett, I'm never inviting you on our pod again, and I'm going to fight you.
You shouldn't have even asked the question. Is my thing.
Well, Chuck asked it, and we had to answer because we are content gods here. Okay.
And because Chuck is our favorite.
Chuck. Shout out to Chuck. I guess to pile on that, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with your Leonard Floyd point. I want to fight you over it, but yeah. I don't necessarily disagree. I kind of wonder whether the Bears want to invest in running backs, and that to me makes me wonder whether these next 2 years are Tariq Cohen's last in Chicago, just based off that, just seeing how the running back market developed in free agency over the past few days. They didn't give $5 million to Tevin Coleman, and I recognize that Tariq Cohen's a better game breaker than Tevin Coleman, but Tariq Cohen's he's not Le'Veon Bell. He's not touching the ball 25 to 30 times a game. He's a guy that's playing 40 to 50% of the snaps of every game. That's a guy. Are the Bears going to want to invest in him? Is that someone that will want to be classified as more of a receiver? Because in my opinion, he is more of a receiver. I mean, that's basically how the Bears use him, as much as he's listed as a running back. I wonder whether he might be the least likely of that young player core to actually come back, just based on how the position develops and just based off, depending on how he gets classified.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I totally agree, and I think we're going to see even more this year, depending on how the draft shakes out, or if they do sign another running back, which I don't think they're going to do. But if they draft another guy, I think we're going to see Cohen in the slot a ton. As a receiver, I think we're going to see him in motion a ton. We're going to see just him being used as anything but a running back. But kind of on the same token, the thing is, like you're saying, is his market isn't going to be that big. He's dynamic. He can bust big plays open. He is versatile as can be. But yeah, he has limitations, obvious limitations. So if he's up for a Tevin Coleman 2-year, $8.5 million deal, they're going to lock that in a millisecond. And so that's what I'm saying. Also, I mentioned Floyd and Trubisky because I'm mentioning the two highest paid positions in football. And I also think it's important to remember teams do look at their the roster. It's okay, what percentage of our cap is going to this position group? And Khalil Mack is obviously taking up a significant portion of the salary cap every year going forward, as he should be. But it's kind of akin to the Clay Matthews, Nick Perry situation where you have the one, you add the second one, but then he struggles, but you can't afford to spend again at defensive end / outside linebacker. So that's the only reason why those two guys come up first. I mean, I don't know what everyone likes to say. Whitehair's going to get extended soon, and he's been good, but I mean that's not a guarantee. Center is a replaceable position. Daniels has looked great at left guard now. The rest of the line, well, the tackles, well, actually, the whole line kind of needs an overhaul. So, in a couple of years, besides Daniels, pretty much everyone, we'll see. So, yeah, I don't know, I'm talking in circles now. But yeah, so I mentioned the big guys because they're going to cost the most. So,
let's finish with this one. We're already running long, but this is a jam-packed TBN radio. My friend Chuck says it this way. He's keeping it simple and he's keeping it general. Is the Bears roster stronger on March 14th than it was on January 16th? Are they closer to championship now than they were over 2 months ago? And why or why not?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So let's just go through it. So you lose Amos, Bellamy, Kevin White, Eric Kush, and I think I'm forgetting one person. Okay, so
still Bryce Callahan likely, or maybe
we'll see. Yeah, right. And so yeah, it turns on that. To be honest, in my opinion, it turns on whether or not they bring him back or lose him. But I guess I would say they're kind of neutral, but it's not trying. I'm not trying to avoid the question. I guess okay. I'll say they're worse, but I think that you have to remember that this is what happens with NFL teams that are good. You're gonna lose talent, and instead of panicking and replacing it constantly, sometimes you have to basically, take a flyer on maybe a Buster Skrine and just hope that you can just bury him with 10 really good defensive players and just hope he's not as big of a liability as he could be. You can't pay everyone. So, I guess I would say slightly worse, but I think overall the team, I mean, the chemistry, the culture, the atmosphere, there's now confidence because they now know they can actually win games and dominate games for a whole season. So yeah, like on paper, I guess I would say worse, but the ability, their potential is not changed. They could still do as well or better than they did before.
And that's my thing too. I mean, they're not even one of those typical teams that had a roster purge. They entered free agency with 20 of 22 2018 starters locked in. We can debate the merits as to whether they maybe should have made a little more tweaks there or could have made tweaks there, but they're basically the same exact team still, aside without an account of any internal roster development, without any draft picks, which is obviously something that doesn't follow along the original timeline. I mean, they stayed neutral. I agree with you. It depends on how you view the Clinton-Dix signing. I like the Clinton-Dix signing. I think that's an excellent playmaker. I think they are closer to championship. I think just based off of virtue of being able to maintain the puzzle, being really being able to maintain the core, a luxury that most teams in their position where they'd have the painful playoff loss and would have to kind of overhaul a lot of stuff going into the next season. Like that doesn't happen. That doesn't really happen in the NFL, and the Bears have the rare luxury of being able to continue this window for this season and probably even for the season after, for 2019 and 2020. This is their championship window, and really none of that got harmed. They didn't really no one went over to the window to go slam it shut. It barely moved open. If anything, it moved up. Like the breeze, there's a little bit of a stronger breeze coming in from that window. To me, as I tweeted about yesterday, and I'll have like actual full thoughts in an article. Like the biggest roadblock for them to making a championship run, Brad, is Trubisky becoming a consistent star quarterback, guy that has a statistical, let's just put like a statistical line, 30 touchdowns, 30 plus touchdowns, 12 interceptions or less, throws for 4,000 yards. Doesn't have the kinds of, he can occasionally obviously still have bad games. Every star quarterback can have a bad game, but doesn't have as many valleys as he did in 2018. A guy like Anthony Miller becoming a vaunted playmaker and not having his playing time fade down the stretch. A guy like James Daniels becoming the cornerstone of the offensive line, becoming a Pro Bowl level player. Adam Shaheen actually being useful. Like that's the things that will determine whether they've gotten worse or better. But from a pure free agent perspective, from a pure evaluative perspective, like they've done their job. They've done their job perfectly. Like they are still in line as one of the best teams in the NFC on paper, as one of the best teams in the NFL on paper. And as much as like someone will want to say how much the Packers improved, how much the Lions improved, how much the Vikings maybe stayed in place and are kind of hoping for a rebound year, to me, the Bears are still the class of the North, despite one. I recognize that it's one season. They're still the class of the NFC North, and to me, they're still one of the top two heavy dogs in their conference, and that's how they should operate.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think like to put a bow on it too, I would say that in 2019 they may have gotten like slightly worse, but based on what they did, how does it look going down the road in the future to 2020? They got better, inarguably, because like I said, you can't pay everyone. If you pay an Amos $9 million a year, maybe they were, had a better 2019, but it all but ensures that they can't pay, the next guy to come up in 2020, and they can't be as active in free agency and stuff like that. So they made the decisions that we talk about all the time, that those consistently good teams like the Patriots do, where you think the Patriots wanted Trent Brown back? Yeah, of course they did, but they're not going to pay him as the highest paid left tackle in the history of football, because then they couldn't be good for 20 years straight. So the Bears are making decisions like that, where you're looking, a couple years down the line, even though they are, we're talking about the Super Bowl window, and they think they can win one next year. They're not going to hedge their future on trying to win one next year, because football, end of the day, is random.
That's the key point. Good teams can be in win now mode without sacrificing everything else. Yep. That's why people were so fascinated. You were noting how people were fascinated with you as a compensatory pick expert, because that's the kind of thing that good teams are able to do. They're able to accrue draft resources and draft capital while competing for championships. And that's something the Bears haven't done for a while, and that's something that they still have to shift, and that they kind of have started doing well in relative respects in dipping their toes into both ends of the water. So we'll see how that develops, but surely enough of a moving of the needle of a 2019 offseason at this point. Brad, my friend, as I'll say for now and then forever on, I appreciate you coming on, and it's always nice to have a future GM who will be an anonymous source of mine, even long after I leave covering football. It'll be nice to know the ins and outs, and we have these kinds of jam-packed conversations as those baselines.
Well, I appreciate the compliments as always. You like to gas me up, but I will say
I do. I am being genuine. Okay, I also gas you up, but I'm also being genuine.
No, I appreciate it, but I really do. But if you say I'm going to be a source, then you're probably guaranteeing I'm not going to get that job in the first place. So
okay, but they won't know. They won't necessarily know that it's me. Like they can make a guess, but they won't necessarily know, Brad.
true.
Like
We'll find a third party that you'll funnel information to.
yeah, an assistant
We'll
GM you can blame. You can put the blame on or something, or like an intern, some kind of like field intern, something like that, right?
Yep, you're right. You're right. We'll figure it out.
You guys can follow Brad on Twitter at BradOTC. He's done fantastic work all this week. Free agency, I'm sure you've already gotten light to it. A up and coming riser in the football world, and you don't want to miss out what he has in store. You want to miss out what he has in store on his own account and what we at TBN and as he moves through everything. You can follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski, and you can follow us on Twitter at the Blitznet. Until then, everybody, after this jam-packed free agent episode, stay classy.